On this episode of Scammer Stories, I'm just back from Washington, D.C., and I'm ready to share what the experience was like, how I was chosen, and a little of the behind the scenes that people don't normally get to hear. I'll also share the audio of my speech, since so many people have reached out to say they missed it while I was live on C-SPAN and the Senate Judiciary Committee website. So, let's start with how all of this came about. I've been doing the podcast since 2019, and I've done interviews here and there for different media outlets, but I never really got any traction from those appearances. Then, several months ago, a reporter from NBC reached out and said she'd found the podcast and she wanted an interview as part of her coverage on the Romance Scam Prevention Act. That's the one co-authored by Senator Marsha Blackburn. So the reporter was so kind to me and ended up using a little of the podcast audio in her piece that aired on the Today Show. As a reporter myself, I knew that reporter didn't have to mention the podcast at all. Other news outlets have left that out of their stories, and I'm okay with that. I might do the same thing in their shoes because you only have so much time or so many words, all that kind of stuff. Anyway, that story got a lot of traction, and I noticed a spike in the number of listeners on the podcast. Then a few weeks ago, I'm just sitting there drinking coffee on a Saturday morning with my husband, and I got an email from an aide at Senator Chuck Grassley's office, and the email said they wanted to meet with me virtually to discuss the possibility of testifying before the Senate Judiciary Committee. I was so excited just about the meeting. I wanted to share all I could about the romance scams with the people in this office for the chairman of this super important committee. I thought the odds of them officially inviting me to testify in front of Congress were actually pretty slim. That meeting went really well. I spoke with the two former prosecutors who are in his office now. They let me talk for as long as I wanted to on my mom's story and different solutions I've heard from people who I've interviewed on the podcast. We talked for about 45 minutes, and they said if I was chosen, they'd be in touch as soon as possible. So that was on a Tuesday. I had that interview. And they said I may need to be there to testify by that next Tuesday. Unfortunately, they didn't have any funds at the time to help me with my trip or my stay. I said I'd be there regardless if needed. Then Senator Durbin's office wanted an online meeting with me as well a couple days later. I think there were 4 aides on that meeting with me, but the call was shorter. They didn't have as many questions, just mainly wanted to hear about my experience. About a week later, I got confirmation that Senator Grassley's office did, in fact, want me to come testify as part of a panel. I learned that there would be 3 other panelists, and they were waiting for confirmation on that 4th one. So I asked my aunt, who is my mom's sister, if she wanted to go with me, and we started planning the trip. Her plane ticket was more than mine, and she wanted to get the most bang for her buck and go early to see the sights. I agreed to leave on a Saturday ahead of the hearing on Tuesday. And the night before I was supposed to leave, it dawned on us we were flying into Washington, D.C. on the day of the big military parade and celebration. I was concerned that my flight wouldn't make it there with all the extra traffic, and even thought they might cancel the hearing altogether with everything going on in the Middle East. So I make it to Ronald Reagan Airport at 4:20 p.m., and the airspace was canceled and closed at 4:39. So all good there. I met my aunt at the airport, and even though the streets were closed and there were protests and things, we didn't have any problems getting to the hotel. So we had a cocktail and dinner and went to bed after a long day of travel. The next day was a nightmare getting around D.C. because of all the street cleanup. But we managed to make it to the Holocaust Museum. After about an hour and a half, it took us to get there with several Uber drivers ordered and canceled. So we found several delicious places to eat. I'm obsessed with eating out, and the food in D.C. is incredible. We did a lot of shopping along with our eating and drinking tour. And before we knew it, my alarm was going off at 6 a.m. to get ready to head to Capitol Hill. I was told to be there at 9:15 because it can take a while to get through security. I'm always annoyingly early. So we sailed through the security check, which kind of surprised me. I thought that I'd get a pat down. They'd want my driver's license, my passport, something, but it took us 5 seconds to get through security. And we found the room where the Senate Judiciary Committee meets. We were so early that they were still setting up and doing a sound check, but they let us walk in and get familiar with the room, and I was in awe. The history that has happened in that room, I was a little overwhelmed. It's beautiful, but not as big as it looks on C-SPAN. So my aunt and I went to wait nearby until it was time, and when we saw the doors were about to open, we saw a line of people waiting to get in, and I have no idea where these people came from or what they were doing. It didn't help my nerves, that's for sure. I wasn't sure if they would let me take my bag and cell phone in. I mean, I've never done anything like this, but I took my bag and my cell phone in. My aunt grabbed a picture, and all of a sudden, it was time to stand up and take the oath. So by this time, the meeting was starting about 15 minutes late because they had a security briefing on the threat of public officials being shot after the shooting over the weekend in Minnesota. So the panelists, we all raise our right hands and agree to tell the truth and take our seats. Senator Grassley begins with his 5-minute presentation, and he had some wonderful things to say. I was really impressed with everything he knew. Let's go ahead and hear that real quick. Up next, Senator Durbin has his 5 minutes to speak on the topic. And in the meantime, I noticed that the senators are coming and going very casually. I'm sure they have 1,000 meetings to get to that overlap. So it was just interesting how they were just coming and going. So Durbin sounded pretty passionate about the topic as well. And when he's done speaking, I'm the first panelist to share a speech that I prepared beforehand and sent to Grassley's office to approve. I wasn't sure how I was going to handle this. Would I have dry, nervous mouth? Would I be noticeably shaking? Well, here's how it went. So as you can hear, I did start to get emotional when speaking about my mother's death. I was just sitting there thinking, I cannot believe I am here in front of the Senate Judiciary Committee telling my mother's story and how she would have loved to have been there with me. She loved to be the center of attention, and she just would have eaten it up. So now that I got through the speech, I had to pay attention so I could answer questions. This is the part that I was really nervous about. I was happy that one senator at the very end asked the question that I hate, but that needs to be asked. And that is, she asked me about the addiction aspect and how we need to find solutions on that as well. Now, the entire hearing lasted a little under an hour and a half, and the panelists had some really enlightening ideas. So I want to go ahead and hear a little bit from them really quickly. What we've got here is the head of the Elderly Fraud Counsel company that he started. We have the head of AARP, and we have, okay. The panelists got together after the hearing to share more thoughts and ideas. My biggest takeaway was the amount of resources and money that Australia and the UK are lending to the cause, and it's working. The bad news is our government has done nothing. The good news is there's a lot of ideas we can implement to put a dent in romance scams and pig butchering. There isn't just one solution, though. This is so complex. I think everyone's starting to finally get that and pay attention. We're going to have to go after it from every angle, and Congress is finally listening. It can't hurt for you to write them to share your story, okay? Until next time, Scammer Warriors.